We will talk a bit about reusing of documentation or eliminating duplication design control as the title goes for the presentation. And I would like to shift focus a bit on this. This is not to type less. The idea here is to think about how you gather information, how you structure information, and how you make sure that people within your company work in a streamlined way and make their life a bit easier in the development department. And also, if you consider that you have only one small group doing all the projects, then maybe this is of less important. They will have some kind of know-how transfer throughout the way they work. But typically you have different teams with slightly different knowledge, and reusing the work of others is a great way of sharing knowledge. And I'm going to start by diving into highlighting 4 different scenarios that I picked out. There are of course more, but one of course is if we have requirements coming from standards, it would be nice if we could kind of pull these in to our design development in a structured way so that we don't have to kind of start digging again. It's very common that a company has a number of devices within a certain area, certain field of expertise, and that it's maybe not that hard to figure out, after a while at least, what kind of standards that are applicable for that line of business. Second scenario for reuse would be some kind of common technical functionality. Let's say we have this set of devices within the company. There will be some repeat business. And if we could structure that in an efficient way, we could also make life a bit easier in the daily project work as such. Now, a third is a slightly different. The first, I would say, they're kind of reusing information as such. The third is more of reusing and establishing some kind of a system, I would say system structure or system idea of how we build machines or how we build devices. And here we're going to look at what happens if we kind of decompose the system into smaller parts, let's call them components, and document these components as a standalone units, and then actually start pulling multiple units together to build our end product as such. We're going to look at a little example of that later on and see how we can reduce the documentation in that case as well. And last but not least, I would like to look at how we actually duplicate information in multiple reports and documents, and how we can do that in a safe and secure way to not end up with stale copies or lost copies and things like that, to make sure that we are communicating the same thing, even though we're doing this in different ways through different documents, through different reports. So I'm going to start with requirements from standards and regulations. And here we have a bunch of good suspects that we can look at. I'm thinking about the GSPR from the MDR, IVDR. Of course, they are well formulated. You can probably pull them in one just directly from the norms into a development project. There's also some pretty high-level software requirements from 62304 and so forth. But there's also a bunch of technical standards where, for example, 60601-1 is the top norm for a bunch of device-specific standards in terms of technologies, where you have great content for requirements, even for, I mean, from 60601, you have potential hazards, you have proposed mitigations and tests and things like that you can pull in. Now, a challenge with this kind of content is that it could be, for example, if we take the example from 6601-1, that you may need to pull out portions with requirements, specification, tests, and risks that should stick together. So it's not just the complete list of requirements, the complete list of specifications. It will depend on your device, what kind of technology do you have, who's the end user, and things like that. That it's not always easy to find these reusable groups of data. And I would also like to highlight that there's a common idea of saying, okay, you should be complying with the following ISO norms or IN norms or whatever, and you're passing that on to the development team. I think process regulations, they should be captured by your quality management system already or addressed by, and if you work according to that, then you should be fine with these type of regulatory content. If there are some bits and pieces that you should address within your development project, we would advise that you try to get that into an understandable and translated version for the engineers working on the task. So there are a bunch of interpretations that are known to companies and known within the business, use these instead of just copying straight out of the law book. That's something that we see a lot. People don't really know what to do when they see a regulatory requirement, and there's always good guidances around, right? And we've seen that also now from the cybersecurity and from the AI domain. Look at the guidances. Usually the regulations are short, but the guidances are a bit more, I would say, a bit more meat on the bones. Now, there's also additional regulatory content that we would like to kind of have reuse of, and here I'm looking at a couple of candidates for intended use, purpose, device description, UDI, and things like that. Here I'm not talking about reusing the content, the actual data itself, but we maybe would like to reuse the data structure, data model, to make sure that we're not missing anything. And this is, of course, also an interesting way of communicating your quality management system and also making sure that people know what to work on. And it could be simple tools like a good document template, a list of predefined chapters that you should kind of fill out the blanks, things like that, just to make sure that you're not missing anything. So when we're talking about reuse, we're also talking about kind of methodology or basically our templates for making sure that we have a complete product documented at the end of the project release. Within Aligned Elements, we have a couple of different functions to support these things. Of course, we have the support of document templates. We also have the support of different design items. We have holders for data and things like that. A very simple thing is to import chapter structures. You can also make sure that it's kind of not changeable by end users, to make sure that these are the chapter structures we should enforce for a user need document, for whatever kind of content that you can imagine. And a very important thing when it comes to communicating the intention of a quality management system is to have a target traceability. Basically, on day one, be able to communicate, this is what the traceability should look like when we have a finished product that we want to release. So this is what we're going to work towards. And that's, of course, great help for people in the team to know how to get what's the state of done, what's the definition of done, as Udo mentioned before. And then, of course, you can import any kind of design item, import and export requirements, risks, and tests. And here I would like to give you a little hint as well. We have a feature called Assistance. This makes it a bit more easy to package portions of design data that you can pull into a project based on kind of a the question catalog to figure out, does this apply? Yes, then you would need software requirements from 62304. Does this apply? Yes, then you would need potential hazards from 14971 and X something. It just makes it a bit smoother for users to pull in the information that they may need for their target device development. Now, as a next category here, the case number 2, looking at common technical functionality in devices. It could be that the company wants to do things their way. And this is a great way of harmonizing how people work within a company. We have maybe a catalog of or a library of standard requirements. This is how we write things. We need to have user management to this product. We need to have some kind of diagnostic logging. We need to have some cleaning procedures. This is how we've solved this in the past. And this is, of course, a great way to get going with a bulk of the documentation. It could also be that you have some standardized dependencies with your devices and accessories thereof, interfaces, APIs, and whatever that may be. Or you have standard ways of testing things, you have standard ways of producing things. Pull in that information, and you will have, of course, a great start. You're setting the table for the project team, and very importantly as well, you're making them learn from their colleagues and predecessors within the company. So I think this is kind of a golden opportunity of passing on information and passing on knowledge. And there is, of course, some major challenges with setting up this common requirements and common tests. For example, you have to think about that you cannot write them too product dependent. So to be able to share information, they of course have to be a bit more generic in nature and the way they author them. And some companies, they start with the hen and the egg question. Should we build a common library of information first, or should we do the product first? Here, I think it's very, very simple to answer that. Being a man with I'm not going to say it depends. I'm just going to say start with the product first. Then you can crunch the information, you can learn from the information, and then if you have to basically clean it up a bit to put that into common library, please do so later on. Perfectly fine. You will see what's handy to have the reuse going. But you will need to have a way of maintaining this common information. And you will probably also have the problem with knowing where did we place these common requirements? Where are they at? How can we track them? And here I would probably just have to say that in a manual document-based system, you will have very little opportunities of doing this in an efficient way. So it's kind of also back to what we do for a living, providing the tool Aligned Elements, some kind of a database design item-based system is probably your best chance of doing this, right? And this also goes for if we update a common requirement, what happens to all the users thereof? How do we track that? How do we push out changes to these products and make sure that we get it harmonized? And for that, we have something new and exciting coming up in our November release. We're going to come up with a new release of Aligned Elements, and we have something in hold for you, which we call catalog projects. Here we have a little screenshot of what it's going to look like. Almost feels like Christmas, but we still have some way to go. The idea is that some of the content will be pulled in from so-called catalog projects. So you can call them libraries, whatever. It's a standard Aligned Elements project as such, but with the difference that we only use it to maintain common information that we share among proper product device projects. And it's easily identifiable from the user interface. We can see we have a couple of green entries here, user management, logging, ease of use requirements that we pulled in. And they also have a reference back to where they are actually being maintained, namely in the catalog project as such. And to pull that into your project, you just use our normal importing capabilities in the tool. We know where the catalog projects are around, and we will find them for you, and you can pull in the information. Here we have an example of pulling in a bunch of GSPRs from our catalog project. And the neat thing about this is that we have the possibility of saying that part of the data is kind of read-only. So users in the product development project are not allowed to change that. But you can, of course, have additional fields that you may maintain within projects to do additional project stuff, maintenance, or adding rationale, why do we need this, or something like that. So we can secure portions of the data and still allow you to work on these items. And when we have updates kind of from our central catalog project, our library, so to speak, then we can also just ask the tool, where are these items being used? In which projects? What happened? Did something change from our original source? Do we have like an older revision of these items out in our products? I can imagine that you will probably not push these changes all the time. It depends on, are your product getting a new version, coming out a new version on the market, then we're going to do some development tasks on it, then we'll probably push out a newer version of how we envision the user management to work, for example. So this is a new way of actually maintaining, I would say, smart copies throughout multiple development projects. And we're really looking forward to this, to get that out on the market and see what our customers think about it. Now I'm going to jump to a third way of doing this kind of reuse of components. So case scenario number 3 here. And this image I've taken from one of our white papers on a web page. It's talking about modular design control. And here we have a company in the neighborhood. They're building lab robots, and they have a bunch of standard components that basically make it to every single lab robot, but in slightly different constellations. And the schematics that we see here is the big box is like the robot itself. It can pipette liquids, so it has pipetter. And it can also incubate tests. So it has an incubator and it has a reader to figure out any diagnostic result at the end of the day. And you can imagine that we will have a number of different end customer products that are all using these components, but in different ways. One has 2 incubators, one has this specific reader, one has, I don't know, 96 tip pipetter, and the other one has only an 8 tip and things like that. So if we imagine that we build our documentation by documenting each component as a separate little documentation project, then we can pull in the documentation from a number of component technical files and create the grand technical file for the end customer product. So that means that we only have to do the documentation once for a particular component, and we can easily assemble the complete product documentation from all of these components. This, I would say, needs to go hand in hand with how you actually build your products, of course. If you don't build your products as components, this is probably going to go out of hand. But if this is the way you look at the world and your system, this is a good way of actually making an efficient way of working. Now, reuse usually also comes with some kind of a complexity. So you will have to have a little idea of how can different products actually reuse components that are evolving over time. We need to have some kind of a versioning thing going there. And what happens to a product when a component gets modified from a neighboring product? Can we, keep track of that, or can we separate that in a good way? And also, how do you pull in all the documentation when you do a proper product release? Now, for all of these challenges, we of course already have built-in functionality in Aligned Elements. We have a feature called linked projects. We do always version traces, so we don't. It's not enough to just version design items as such. We also make sure that user need 1 revision 5 is tracing to design input requirement 3 revision 7, for example. We know that in background, and this is something that's been used heavily in this feature of having linked projects. We also maintain the context, and that would kind of be the end customer product as such. That would be the parent project linking all the underlying components. And you can actually build up linkage using any depth of project hierarchy in the system. But what we've also seen, it gets a bit more complex in knowing where is my documentation. What you don't really have to be afraid of, though, is if you change something for a component, it will only be automatically updated for that product context. It will not affect any other linked products as such. You have to go to these neighboring products later on and say, yeah, I would like to have the news here as well. But there's no automatism in propagating changes from components unless you actually want to. But it's a possibility, and have a look into this little white paper if you want to learn more about this. We also have a couple of videos on this, of course, on our homepage and YouTube channel. Now, last but not least, this is probably something that we see the most out in the field. It's promise and a curse at once. In manual documentation systems, this is probably one of the top rejection reasons for any registration in the MDR or FDA, that you don't have exactly, for example, the same device description throughout your documentation. There is some content that are just asking for being repeated throughout different documents. You have different aspects of your development. You maybe have your use needs, maybe you have your usability engineering, you have your risk analysis and things like that, and summaries and testing. And once in a while, you will mention things from your intended use purpose, device description, things like that. And this information will be spread over multiple reports. And how do we make sure that it actually is consistent throughout all of these reports and we don't miss to change something in one of these reports? I would say in a manual documentation system where we write the documents by hand, this is probably going to be a hard thing. If I do proper copy and pasting from document A to B, I need to kind of remember that. The next time I go and modify document A, I also need to go and modify document B. And that's really one of the biggest challenges in doing it the manual way. And do you know exactly where you have to update the information? And sometimes with just slight rephrasing, the copies aren't really identical, and it's kind of hard to maintain that in a manual way. But luckily enough, we have the possibility of using a slightly smarter tool than just Microsoft Word. We can place design items in Word, and we have them in a managed way. They are revision safe. We can basically go to any design item within the tool and ask, in which reports does this one actually appear? Where is it used? And of course, we can use inconsistencies to see if things are up to date, and we can automatically synchronize Word documents as well in the tool. So that's very helpful. And now looking at these 4 different ways of doing reuse for TechDoc, I think the takeaway messages from getting it right is we have an opportunity here of leading by examples. This is how we work at company XYZ to solve this. This is how we can also transfer that information and knowledge to other people in the department and within the company, to other teams. And of course, having catered and reviewed information will reduce errors. It's pre-checked content. We can have safe reuse of data, making it stick, making it consistent throughout projects, products, and documents. And if you go for the component reuse scenario, the decomposition can actually help you to structure your products and releases and make it a bit more obvious how the dependency actually work within your system landscape. And the intention, of course, is to also speed up the development a bit. We have prepared data content, less duplicate work, and of course also less duplicate data. And I think the target that we should have for ourselves, the goal that we should set up would be to make sure that the next project will run a little smoother than the last one. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.